Chapter 21. Even before her mother opened the door, an uncomfortable feeling arose in the pit of Vivian's stomach. They did not have callers often. The number of callers besides Nadine who came at 11 in the morning was even smaller, and Nadine was not able to come and visit until tomorrow, as she had told Vivian. Vivian was sitting on the sofa and sewing when she heard her mother open the door and then make a small cry of surprise. "Oh, Mr. Morgan, we had despaired of ever seeing you again." There was an awkward pause, in which Vivian's heart hit the floor. She looked down at the needle in her hands and thought about stabbing herself with it to make him go away quickly again. How dare he appear like this on her doorstep after everything that had happened? "How good of you to come by," her mother was saying, in a voice that was now audibly shaking. "Well, do come in. Vivian, Mr. Morgan is here to visit. I'm assuming he would like to speak with you. In fact, I was just... Well, as it happens, Mr. Morgan, I was about to run out for some pressing errands, so I hope you will forgive me." Vivian set down her sewing, stood up, and almost fell over with dizziness. She turned around just in time to see Gregory Morgan bowing slightly as he stepped through their front door. The pale, shifting memory of Gregory in her mind, as compared to his extreme resplendence in real life, was like suddenly being blinded by the sun. Vivian opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Had he really looked like this even before? It was like being caught in the middle of some kind of crime by a potentially wrathful god. What would he say to her? What could she say to him? And why should she feel ashamed when he had wronged her? "Mademoiselle Vivian," began Gregory, his hands behind his back, his face a few shades paler than usual above his dark suit and vest. She saw his surprise as he took in her changed look with her short, modern haircut. For a brief instant, she thought she could feel his hands in her hair, not tender and fatherly as he had always been, but rougher and more like Chip now did. She felt the blush creep up her neck. Her mother talked on awkwardly. "I'm so sorry, but I'm just going to gather my shoes. There they are, and here is my coat and my pocketbook. Oh dear, I am afraid I have to hurry out just now. Do forgive me, Mr. Morgan, but we seem to have run out of a few things, and, well, it has been good to see you, of course. My apologies." There was a scramble of activity as her mother pulled on her shoes, tossed her coat over her arm, and grabbed her pocketbook. And then she was out of the apartment door so fast that Vivian thought it was a wonder she did not trip over the doormat in her hurry to be gone. The door closed behind her, and Vivian and Gregory were alone. Only whereas before she had dreamed of these moments, suddenly it was a truly terrifying prospect. She felt a rush of loathing towards her mother for being such a coward and leaving her to face this discomfort alone. Gregory had turned his head to watch her mother run out the door. Now he looked back at Vivian and asked, "Perhaps she has run out of, what was it, dried noodles again, or some such thing. I do hope I have not caused any upset." "Hello, Gregory," said Vivian. She moved around the sofa, still blushing, coming closer to him, feeling him in the room with every step, being acutely aware that she was approaching him. He stood like an unmoving star and watched her come closer. It was hard not to hate him right now, suddenly remembering exactly what he had looked like that night when she had broken into his apartment, still wanting him, and now knowing somewhat better what she wanted and how it might have been with him if he had wanted her. "Vivian," he said again, and she remembered the way that they had been alone in this very room when he had spoken her name for the first time, just like this. like scripture being read. Now, as then, the emotion in the room was suddenly thick enough to cut with a knife, and no number of kisses from anyone else had dented the desire for him, even in the slightest, Vivian noticed with rising concern. "You never wrote to me," she said coldly. "Not once. Was it just not that kind of a trip, perhaps?" He recoiled at her words. "Vivian, I wrote to you. I wrote about you. I wrote pages and pages. You know me. Can you imagine that my heart would ever bleed and I not write about it? I did not have your address. I wrote it down, but, well, I have this broken memory, and I left my notebook behind, and I tried and tried to find out your address, but no one knew it. It sounds dreadfully idiotic to say it like this to you now, but believe me, that every word is true." This was just about the flimsiest excuse Vivian could imagine. Did he really expect her to believe him? He moved his hands out from behind his back, his hat still in one of them, and he reached for her hands. She pulled away and stepped back. "You should know that things are not where we left them, sir," she said. "We did not part on the most happy of terms, you and I, and in any case, I did not know if you would ever return, and there is now someone else. I have another beau." There, she had said it. Pulling together her courage, she looked up from the floor to his face and saw that he looked relieved. Well, of course. He was happy that she no longer wanted him and that he was off the hook, that she would not be troubling him with her stupid, unwanted affection. This realization made her sick to her stomach. He had come in with this unbelievable excuse that he had not been able to write her, but then his face betrayed him when it showed his relief at having finally rid himself of her by this means. "I hear you, mademoiselle. Shall we sit down?" Gregory asked, motioning with his hat towards the sofa. Vivian hesitated, then nodded. There was no way out of it. There was nowhere to run away to. There was a painful, dreadful conversation that awaited them, and somehow she felt that they had to have it. But after that, she would be free, and everything would be cleaned away. She prayed to God that it would be mercifully brief, because the horrible tug of various fierce emotions, from shame to anger to desire, threatened to shatter her outward composure. They seated themselves, and Gregory set down his hat and looked at her. For a moment she thought he would scold her, but then the corners of his eyes crinkled up with sympathy. "Vivian, I'm not the Count of Monte Cristo. I'm not here to be upset with you, as he was with Mercedes when she did not wait for him, while he was locked in prison for years and years, and she went and married another. I understand. I feared this, but I understand. Things have changed. Your hair, for one." He reached a hand to touch a stray lock, then stopped himself, and a breath caught in her chest as she suddenly saw the effort that it required for him to interrupt the motion. "Do you like it?" she asked him awkwardly, knowing full well that he knew that she knew that he did not. Gregory shrugged. "It isn't awful. If you're happy with it, then that is what counts. For me, I don't care if you cut it all off. I never loved you for your hair." "You could have fooled me," thought Vivian bitterly. "Sometimes I'm not sure that he ever loved me for anything else." "Tell me about this new beau. Who is he, and does he make you happy?" asked Gregory, in a tone of voice that one might use if inquiring if it will rain and should one wear one's boots. "He is a friend of Frank and Nadine's," said Vivian. "Our friendship developed rather quickly."
"I'll say," said Gregory, his tone falsely light.
Vivian ignored the remark and plowed forward. Gregory needed to hear how things stood. "We have, spoken of marriage together. He is a young businessman."
"In what business?" Gregory asked, looking down and brushing an imaginary speck from his dark trousers. "Liquor," said Vivian, with a forceful directness that she had not expected to come out. There, let him gloat how elevated he was above her new beau.
"Ah," said Gregory, looking up again, his eyes filled with a dark sparkle. "That is all to the good. Liquor, I approve. And he makes you happy." "Yes," said Vivian. "He is a wonderful young man, a paragon in all things, and he treats me like a queen."
"I should hope so," said Gregory. "Well, I am glad to hear this. I am open-minded. I have no objections to his staying around."
Vivian felt her lower jaw hang slack. What do you mean?"
"I mean that I have been away for a long time,
and I have had a lot of time to think. Perhaps my standards for myself were too high. Perhaps I have underrated my own positive qualities. Perhaps I was not flexible enough in my earlier thinking. I did not think that it could work between us. But now I'm thinking that I was wrong."
What? Gregory, I may just be a young girl, but even I realize you just cannot come back after months of no word from you and think we can turn back time and go to some other world where you have not yet told me that you never wanted to marry me. Do you take me for a fool?" Vivian cried.
"We have both been fools," said Gregory, dropping all false calm, the passionate throb returning to his voice that she well remembered and that wreaked havoc with her heart.
"Could you not see that I always wanted to be with you? Was it too subtle for you? How my hands shook when you were in my arms, how my words strung themselves together in passionate pleas in my journal, how I held you in Thibodeau as if there was nothing in the entire world but you. I always wanted to be with you, but I did not think that I could be what I thought you deserved. Now it is true that I am not some young man up and coming in business, although I am an avid supporter of the liquor trade, so who knows, perhaps your new beau might be glad to get to know me yet. But I am ready to be reasonable. If it pleases you, keep him. For conversation or for boudoir entertainment, I really do not care. I just want you as my wife." Vivian was so shocked she had to grab onto the edge of the sofa cushions beneath her for support. "Gregory, have you gone mad?" she managed to get out in a strangled voice.
"No, I have not. But I see you are upset. Perhaps you miss my romantic side. I feel like we do not have very much time to lose, under the quickly shifting circumstances. But it is true that I could do this a bit better and on my knees, if you would prefer me that way." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Then he stood up, came to kneel on one knee before her like a caricature of a dark-suited Victorian gentleman at the moment of betrothal, and he opened the box. Inside was a small ball of sparkles against the dark velvet lining, the kind of ring that would suit the wife of an owner of 800 acres. Vivian had never seen such a jewel off of the matinee screen. She knew she was staring at it, for the moment completely dazzled. Silence fell over the room. "I take it you like it?" Gregory asked her. "It is not what I had initially envisioned to give you, but perhaps it might do?" Vivian gulped. This was insanity. Her mother might come back at any moment and see this lunatic scene. Gregory could see her hesitation and must imagine her to be so stupid and shallow that a large diamond ring would sway her back to him after all that had been said,
without an apology or true explanation from him in sight. He must think that, just because she was 17, she must be a complete fool as well. She swallowed hard, reached her hand over, and firmly shut the top of the jeweler's box. "Stand up, for heaven's sake, sir," she told him. "I always thought that because you were older and so fancy, that you were the epitome of good taste and manners. But this is like the Wild West. I tell you that I have discussed marriage with someone else, and you proceed to ask me to marry you? Is the Wild West, then, where you are really from?" He stood up, taller and handsomer than ever, and stuffed the ring box angrily into his pocket. "Where I am from, mademoiselle, a woman does not carry on with a man whom she does not truly want to wed, and she marries only the one she truly loves. Moreover, there is time, up until the preacher cries, 'Does anyone know of a reason why these two should not be wed?' for another to speak his mind." "And you are selfish and dramatic enough to do just that," she spat back at him, then immediately regretted it. He turned sharply away from her and pulled away to the window to look out into the street. There was silence once more in the room, filled only with the sound of real and imagined clocks. In another few moments he would leave, and then anything left unsaid might never be able to be said again. She thought of him running out to a jeweler to buy this ring, coming here with what he knew had to be a slim chance to have his proposal accepted, and she wondered if perhaps his story about the missing notebook and address could have been true after all. He had loved her in Thibodeau. There was no doubt, as he said. She thought of Chip and how sweet the past months with him had been, his even temper, his approachability, and his attentiveness and smiles. Nothing unexplained or potentially worrisome at the fringes of their friendship. The warmth of his arms about her, and his lips eagerly coaxing kisses from her, and all of the fun gatherings that they had had with the others, and the fun rendezvous together with Nadine and Frank. Only the one at the Café du Monde had made her feel a bit melancholy and uneasy. Would she give up all of that for an uncertain, passionate, mysterious man with whom even regular meals would apparently always be out of the question? "You are right," she said at last. "I have loved you. But you are too full of mysteries and unanswered questions for any prudent woman to say yes to. I may be young, but I'm not so foolish as to think that a man's bride would not be entitled to some more answers than you have given me. Moreover, it wounded me deeply when you said you would never marry me, and although you say you have changed your mind, I can still hear your earlier words in my ears, and I cannot seem to forget them. Why was it so strong a no before, if there was no important reason? And if there is a reason, when will I be allowed to learn what it is?" Without fully realizing it, Vivian had stood up to move closer to him. Gregory touched the drapery at the window with light fingertips, so that the curtain barely moved. He was still looking out into the street. There was a long pause, and then his perfect baritone moved through the room, small and fearful suddenly, without any of its earlier arrogant bluster. "Vivian, I cannot have children," he told her simply, pain in his expression. Vivian stopped in her tracks. "What do you mean? People cannot know these things." Gregory let go of the curtain's edge and looked directly at her. "But I know," he said. How do you know? Have you tried to have children with someone else?" she squeaked out. The thought was a horrible one to her for reasons too complex and too painful to investigate. He sighed. I have lain with other women, Vivian. You know that. I told you I had. I have been very honest with you. But that was a long time ago, back when I probably could have fathered children. Before... His voice trailed away. The silence in the room was suddenly heavy with his anguish. He was suffering, and to see him suffer suddenly made her forget her anger, forget his not having written, forget his arrogant and clumsy proposal of marriage and all the rest of it. To see a god suffer was a sight too terrible for a mortal to bear. His long, dark eyelashes lowered, making it impossible to read his expression. Before what? She asked him in a near whisper. Before everything changed. You know that there are ways in which I am not like other people. I get sick if I eat what others easily eat. I have unusual reactions to things that do not bother others. You can thread a needle in the dark, she said, her heart suddenly pounding in her throat. He looked at her for a moment, and she thought he was going to deny it, but then he simply said, Yes. What happened to you, Gregory? Will you ever tell me? She said, her worry about him neck and neck now with her curiosity. The memory of him chasing her down the street in the dark, a very fearful and uncomfortable memory that she had pushed to the back of her mind, now came forward as all of her old questions of him reawakened. Beloved, he said, reaching out for her and putting two cool hands on her shoulders, his eyes shimmery and breathtakingly beautiful, although with the brightness of the window behind him, their color remained indeterminate. Listen to me carefully. We will never speak of it together. This I can swear to you. He closed his eyes for a second, and she waited, breathless, for his next movement. It turned out to be an almost imperceptible squeeze of his hands on the top of her shoulders. It is not only inexplicable, but also terribly awkward and awful. It is like asking someone, in what bordello was it again that you caught the syphilis? There's nothing I can tell you about it. Vivian could feel her eyes widen as the shock of his statement hit her. Was it like that? She asked, her voice shaking. No, it was just an analogy, clearly a bad analogy. It was like a kind of sudden illness. And it changed everything, he said, opening his eyes again and looking directly down at her face. Before, I was an ordinary man. Vivian, do you understand me? I would have jumped to do for you anything you would have wished of me, and done it with a glad heart. Now, there are limits to what I can give you, and I want you to know this before you accept or reject my proposal of marriage. Although I would wish it with all my heart, I will not be able to give you children. Now perhaps you better understand why I do not hold your friendship with your new beau, or indeed with any beau, against you. You are right. Most people do not know that they cannot father children, and so then if they marry, if this should come to be the case, no one can hold it against them. But if a person knows a thing like this to be true, then it puts a responsibility on that person that those who do not know do not have to bear. Now imagine that this is you, and that you love someone very, very much, and that you would tear your own heart in two for them if only... He let go of her and turned away, overwhelmed with emotion. Vivian looked at his long back, saw him curling into the dark shadow of his suit as if he wanted to hide from her, and everything that she felt for him suddenly changed. She reached up a hand and placed her palm on his back, between his shoulder blades. He twitched as if she had hit him. "I'm sorry, Gregory. I did not know. I'm so sorry. It must be awful to know something like this and to suffer because of it. But I still do not understand. Is it because you are unable to... I cannot find the words to say it. Are you able to be a husband but not a father? Or are you not certain if you are able to be a husband either?" Her boldness surprised even herself. But now that it was critical to understand this, even her awkwardness and embarrassment to ask such a question were not enough to stop her. "You are asking about what happens between the hours of sunset and sunrise," he said in a low voice. "Yes," she said, grateful that he had found words around the landmine. "I would love you as best as I know how. I promise you," he said. "And if you find me in any way lacking as a lover, then you are welcome to take others." He ran a hand through his dark hair, ruffling it and disturbing its perfect smoothness, and then he turned back to face her. "Pardon me, but you cannot believe how awkward it is for me to have this conversation with anyone, much less a 17-year-old girl. I'm having one of those moments when you would stand and look down intensely at our shoes. Yes, things are like this, inexplicable and restricted, but it in no way diminishes my love for you, and only shifts my longing from one desired satisfaction to another. Oh, the irony! I have written miles of text, but still cannot put into words how much I love you, or how much it hurts to imagine losing you or somehow failing you. If you marry me, I will give you the best of me that I could ever give to anyone. Whatever goodness is still left in me. And your happiness would be my entire focus in this world for as long as you live." His voice thrummed through every molecule of air in the room and resonated through her very flesh and her bones. Never had his voice been so full of longing, so full of love. "Vivian, there has been no moment since I first met you that I did not love you as an inseparable part of myself. And I will never belong to another if you will not have me." Vivian felt the tears gather in her eyes at his impassioned words, the kinds of phrases that only Gregory might say and not sound ridiculous to her, speaking the way that no one else she knew ever spoke. "But how would we live?" she asked him after a moment, trying to steer back to practicality to clear the air after this excess of passionate pleading. "It would not be a normal life as others have, would it?" "Not exactly. No, it wouldn't," he said to her. And she was both grateful for his honesty and devastated by what it might mean. There was no way for her to win in this conversation, no way at all, and in the next moment she realized that it did not matter because the deck was already stacked against her. Her volatile emotions shifted again. So you can prove how selfless you are and how much you love me by being willing to honestly tell me all these things. But if I discover within myself that I cannot live with them, then my love for you will not have been great enough. Is that it?" she cried, as the tears rebelliously burst forth out of the corners of her eyes. "No, no, my love. You do not have to make the choice in this way," he said. "I will love you no matter what you decide. And I know that you love me also, no matter what you decide. If you choose your new beau, then I will remain with you in another way, or I will go away and only write to you, or you can send me to hell entirely. I would never throw in your face that you did not love me enough, especially as it is not true." "Look, beloved," he said, and at these words he opened his arms, took her in his embrace, and she melted into it without holding back anything. He reached out his fingertips and moved them to the side of her neck, and she felt her head tilt back and her body offer itself to him of its own accord, as if there was no choice to be made. And when his fingers made contact with her skin, she closed her eyes and thought her soul might leave her body. Where was her reasonableness now? Where was the moment of decision, where she could determine her will in her mind and then assert it? There was no moment of decision. Her heart had already overridden every objection. Chip and all of his eager caresses were swept away as if they had been merely a pile of dried leaves. "You love me," Gregory said in a perfect, low-voiced whisper, and the sound of his voice, so near to her ears, filled her with a kind of drunken buzzing sound. She knew in that moment that it was true, and also that it could not overcome all that they needed to overcome to be together. And the pain of it broke down her last barriers of self-control, and she burst into loud sobs. He pulled her in tighter toward him and held her so close that she felt his every breath as it moved through his broad, hard chest. Somewhere further away, his hand moved consolingly along her shoulder blades, but all that she could feel in the foreground was her body shaking with sobs and the thud of his heart in his chest as she was pressed against him. Time elongated and then vanished. Then, without warning, the entire mountain that had been building in her chest suddenly exploded. "I'm sorry, Gregory. It is not that I do not love you enough, but I cannot marry you," she choked out between sobs. "Hush," he whispered in her ear. There. Everything will be all right somehow, whether you marry me or not. I always knew it was a long shot." When she regained her self-control, she said, "Perhaps I am too weak, but I want a family and children and a normal life and dinners around the family table and a husband who will be there beside me all night, every night. I want someone with no secrets that he keeps from me, someone with whom I can have a real marriage. My mother lives alone, without any of these things in her life, and I do not want to have her life. I want a real companion, someone who can be a real father and husband. This is what I have always wanted in my life. Forgive me, Gregory, if this sounds like me failing you, but I cannot imagine giving up all of these things, even to be with you." He kissed her hair. "Don't worry. I understand. It is not a lack of love, just a challenge of compatibility. Well, we will be friends then, and I will be the best friend to you that I know how to be. Tell your mother that I will come calling again as a family friend, and tell your new beau that I'm an old family acquaintance. Who knows, Vivi? Perhaps it is also some consolation to me not to have your yes, and then to have to despair or worry about how I would fulfill it. Perhaps everything has turned out for the best, and this new beau has come at the right time so that you do not have to be alone. But you will be alone, she said slowly, looking up at him and knowing that her eyes were surely red and dreadful. Don't worry about me. Love, do you have any idea how long I have been alone? He said to her, smiling tenderly as he touched the ends of her short haircut. This haircut is dreadful, I have to say. Was it his idea? No, it was mine. He was actually not entirely in favor, admitted Vivian. Well, that makes me like him a bit better, I suppose, said Gregory. He caught the ends of her hair in his fingers and sighed, and she felt it in her own chest, as if she had been the one sighing. There are some realities that we must face, then. An old family friend would probably not hold you in his arms like this, he said. If we're going to do this, let us get good at it. He kissed the top of her head and let her go, and she felt her entire being scream, moving back toward him of its own accord, but he sidestepped her advance and reached over to the sofa to pick up his hat. What was happening to her? Think of your beau, Mademoiselle Vivian. He was opposed to your reckless experiment in hairstyle, so he cannot be all bad. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Let us both keep your commitments to him, and let us keep ourselves from shame and sinful deception. Someone once told me that they believe of me that I am an angel. It is a tall order, but I do my best to live up to the expectation. Give my regards to your mother, and tell her that I will be by again on Wednesdays. And with that he let himself out of the apartment and was gone, leaving Vivian shaking and wondering if she had dreamt the entire fantastical and unbelievable scene. The ensuing conversation with her mother did not go well. "What do you mean he will come to visit us as before?" she asked. "I know you think you are part of some more advanced and modern world now ever since you cut your hair and stopped coming home on time from your rendezvous, but even you cannot have two beaux at the same time. What will your new beau think? I will not tolerate this kind of indecent display here in our home." "Mr. Morgan understands that our courtship is over. Where is the difficulty, then?" retorted Vivian. "The difficulty is in that he loves you, and you love him too. I know you were upset about how things turned out when he left for his travels, but if you were not so dreadfully stubborn, you would get over your hurt pride already and return to him. This new beau is not for you." "What? I don't understand. 1 minute you are telling me to be faithful to my new beau, and the next you are telling me to return to Mr. Morgan. Is not my choice of beau my decision?" stormed Vivian. "It certainly is, and you are not making it. My objection is that you think you can have them both somehow. Oh, I understand. Don't you think I don't. Mr. Morgan hurt your pride, and now you are using Mr. Westcott to get back at him. Then, when you think that Gregory Morgan has suffered enough, you will give your new beau the boot and let Gregory win you back. It is obvious, childish, and cruel, and you should be deeply ashamed." Vivian gave her mother a dark look. "Do not presume that you know everything about my friendship with Gregory Morgan," she told her coldly. "I do not ever plan to take him back, and we will never be wed, so there." "How dare you take that tone with me, young lady? This is insanity. You pick the other one? Fine! Then just let Mr. Morgan come next Wednesday, and I will speak to him. I will read him the riot act. This undignified nonsense will stop." Her mother folded her arms sternly in front of her chest. Vivian stomped off into the kitchen nook to sulk. The upcoming days held plenty of worrisome moments for her. She feared telling Chip about Gregory, but knew that if she put it off, it would only seem like she'd been hiding something, and then that would be even worse. In fact, the conversation went well. Chip kissed the end of her nose, laughed, and told her that the return of their family friend did not bother him in the least. Vivian saw no need to mention that Gregory was the handsomest man that the world had ever seen, and was a former beau of hers. Rather, she provided just enough information to serve the purpose at hand, and then afterwards she convinced herself that this was in no way deceptive. Seeing Gregory again made Vivian perhaps even more eager for Chip's kisses than before, a longing that Chip was more than happy to oblige. So the net effect of their conversation was that Chip thought it was a particularly pleasant rendezvous. Vivian, however, came home and spent the next days worrying about what her mother would say to Gregory when he came to call on them. When Wednesday came around, Vivian sat with her ears focused on every sound, waiting to hear him at the door, and when he finally came, she was at the door and opened it as his hand was still finishing his knock. "Mr. Morgan, hello. Do come in." "Yes, do come in," echoed her mother. "I would wish to have a word with you, Mr. Morgan." Gregory stepped in, ducking slightly through the doorframe as he always did, and his eyes caught Vivian's. Vivian looked back at him and tried to telepathically warn him of what was coming. The smile came off of his face, and he turned to Vivian's mother. "Madame Prevet, I'm glad to see you again," he said seriously. "I brought these for you." At these words he handed over a tastefully arranged pastel bouquet curling with delicate ribbons. "Perhaps we should put these into some water first?" Vivian's mother reached out her hand to take the flowers, and instead he took her fingers in his and bowed over her hand and brushed his lips over the back of her hand as the highest decorum for a gentleman would dictate. And Vivian was stunned how, although it was not her hand he was brushing his lips against, she could feel his light kiss on her hand as if it had been her that he had kissed. He looked up at Vivian, and Vivian blushed. Then he deftly distracted Vivian's mother from noticing by handing her the bouquet. "Yes, I shall put these into a vase," said her mother. "But then join me at the dining table, because I would speak with you. I think we have some matters to discuss together." She took the bouquet into the kitchen, and Gregory rushed over to Vivian with that fast and completely silent movement that no one else could duplicate. "Vivian, love, I need to know. What do you want me to fight for? Do you want me to leave? Do you want me to stay as a friend? Do you want to marry me after all? I need to know right now." His voice was an urgent whisper. "Did you have a good trip to Europe?" Vivian's mother inquired from the kitchen. Vivian felt a cold sweat break over her. What did she want? And why did she have only a second to make up her mind? "Don't go," she finally said. "Stay as my friend. Don't leave." Gregory looked at her and nodded, then said loudly, "I beg your pardon. Did you ask me something, madame?" Her mother returned with the flowers in a vase. "I was asking if you had a good trip to Europe," she repeated. "Yes, it was pleasant in parts," said Gregory. Her mother put the flowers down on the dining table and motioned for Gregory to sit down across from her. Vivian hesitated, then sat down stubbornly next to Gregory. Let her mother know that she should not think to separate them so easily. "I'm glad to hear it. Mr. Morgan, we did not hear much from you on your travels, and I have to agree with my daughter that it was rather careless of you to forget her so completely while you were away. You never even sent a postcard. I hope you now understand that the courtship between the two of you is over." Vivian wanted to hide her face in shame. What business was it of her mother's? Sure, she had been very upset with him over the same thing, but oh, the horror of it, to have Gregory berated now for it by her mother, and in Vivian's presence. "Yes, madame, I do fully understand," said Gregory calmly. "Perhaps it would help if I told you about some of the less pleasant parts of my trip. Many of them had to do with deep anguish at not having your address with me. I even had inquiries made from overseas, but you have no registered vehicles or properties, and apparently do not vote. It was impossible to trace your address through any official records. I was very upset by this entire turn of events, and it cast a shadow over the remainder of my trip, especially as Mademoiselle and I had parted on strained terms just prior to my journey." "Things appear to have gone most unfortunately for you, then," said her mother. "Oh, but I no longer think so," said Gregory, leaning back more comfortably in his chair. "My feelings for Mademoiselle Vivian have always been deeply respectful and affectionate, but perhaps a bit more fatherly than she would have liked. I wished to court her, to be able to spend more time with her, to speak with her, and to share things with her, but mostly they were things like theater and museum visits and chaperoned dancing. As I thought on it more deeply, I began to wonder if this kind of affection would make me a good enough husband for her." Here Gregory turned and looked at Vivian, and a tender smile came onto his face. Her beauty had bewitched me, I think, and I was not able to clearly see the gap in compatibility between us until I had gone away and returned. And now I see how happy she is with another, and I know that everything has turned out exactly as it should. We had a friendship of mutual effort. Now, I believe she would say that she enjoys a friendship of more ease and natural affinity with someone more compatible. Vivian saw her mother's brow furrow in confusion. "You did not wish to marry my daughter, then? I know we are but poor seamstresses, but you had given my daughter certain reasons to believe that you wished—" "I wish for many things, madame, but not all of them are wise or suitable for me, and not all of them may be wise or suitable for Mademoiselle Vivian. It is not at all her station in life which is at the root of our differences. My family is deceased, and in light of my feelings of regard for her, I could care less what part of society Mademoiselle comes from. Rather, I am concerned that she deserves someone who loves her perhaps a bit more compatibly than I could. It has been awkward to belatedly discover all of this, but I'm hoping I'm not presuming too much in believing that she has forgiven me." Again he turned to Vivian, and all she could do was nod her head. "And I have forgiven her also, what little there was to forgive, so then you see that all is resolved to satisfaction." Her mother shook her head. "But I still do not understand. You claim to intend to marry her, and now you do not intend to do so. Somewhere there must have been a wrong done. What separates the earlier situation from this one?" "Not a wrong, but an accumulation of wisdom, perhaps," Gregory replied. "Excuse me, madame, but Vivian is so beautiful and so graceful and kind. It would be an easy mistake to make, to believe that one should propose to make her his bride. I would undoubtedly have gotten a great blessing out of such an arrangement, but she, I'm afraid, would have received far less with me than she deserves."
"Ah, so you admit that you made an error, and now you feel yourself unworthy of her," pounced her mother, making Vivian wince. To hear them talk about her as if she was not there was extremely uncomfortable. "Yes, I freely admit it," said Gregory. "She looks much happier now, with her life as it is, than before I left for my travels. Does she not?" Both Gregory and her mother looked at Vivian, and Vivian wondered irritably if this was her cue to look happy on demand. She tried instead for a neutral expression. Gregory continued, "Then let us assume that she has arranged her life according to the dictates of her heart and to what suits her best. To me, the friendship with you both has meant the most to me in all of this. If it is not too big a hurdle for you, I would be humbly grateful to continue to call upon you both once a week, as had been our earlier custom. My offer of courtship sprang out of this true friendship, and now, upon deeper reflection, I find that it was always the friendship that I really wanted to strengthen. I will come, visit, and stay only at your pleasure, of course, as always." Her mother seemed to consider this for a moment, then said, "It is an unusual arrangement to have a former beau come calling. Of everyone, you might perhaps have the most reason to suffer. Would you be contented with such an arrangement of things, Mr. Morgan?" Gregory smiled and looked over at Vivian. "I am contented, if she is contented. Mademoiselle Vivian, would my visits make you uncomfortable? Or would it bring you some joy if I came to visit you both regularly again?" Vivian looked at Gregory, then looked at her mother, and then said, as regally and as definitively as she could, "Yes, it would be my desire if Mr. Morgan could continue to visit us." Her mother sighed and shook her head. "I do not understand at all. Things are very different than when I was younger, I can tell you that." Gregory smiled. "Madame Prevet, they are different now than when I was younger. Sometimes Mr. Gerstner tells me about his younger days when he lived in Europe, and that is more different still. Life there is not at all as it is here. Today, the Great War has made younger people more eager for independence from the older generation, and I am not at all certain that their newfound rebelliousness will yield them much happiness. There, a young woman may decide to leave her family to move to another city to study, putting her at the mercy of all kinds of dangers in an unfamiliar environment. Here, if the most we have to contend with is young ladies having their hair trimmed back to daring lengths," and here he winked at Vivian, "then I think we are doing all right in America. And as for the gentlemen, I think the absence of lederhosen and undignified hats with feathers is also a point in favor of our American ways." Vivian saw her mother break into a small smile in spite of herself. "Yes, what a comfort it is that I do not have to worry about having my daughter being seen on the arm of a grown man in short pants," she said sarcastically. Gregory laughed out loud. "You see, it is always good to look at things in their proper perspective." "What do the ladies in Europe wear these days?" asked Vivian, further coming to Gregory's aid, although it appeared that he did not really need it. "Much the same as here," replied Gregory. "Only they wear it less elegantly, I think, than do the ladies of New Orleans. Perhaps I'm badly biased, or perhaps they simply do not have the quality of seamstresses to create their garments with such care and attention to style." "Your attempts at flattery have always been transparent and clumsy, Mr. Morgan," said her mother, but again she smiled as she said it. Clumsy they may always have been, thought Vivian, but they have also always worked. Here he was, charming her mother again, as she had seen from him before, when they were first getting to know each other.
He was so good at this. Vivian realized she had been foolish to worry about the riot act that her mother had promised to read him. Gregory Morgan could wind her mother around his little finger if he so chose. Gregory bowed his head. Yes, I have been told this before. I, on the contrary, fear I am too straightforward and honest for my own good. A little bit of subtlety and a honeyed tongue would be welcome additions to my gentleman's repertoire. Oh, flatter me, for love delights in praises, to quote Shakespeare. Well, I will put myself to work on that. In the meantime, please tolerate my bumbling phrases and build up my confidence a little, by at least smiling at me in good humor. Here, I will practice in an appropriate Thespian tone. Sigh no more, ladies, sigh no more. Men were deceivers ever. 1 foot in sea and 1 on shore. To one thing, constant never. The ridiculous, silly voice in which he quoted these lines made both Vivian and her mother laugh, and with this laugh, the conversation turned, and Gregory must have known he was in the clear. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a lady's scarf, a few colored postcards, and a book of the sights of Vienna, and gave them to Vivian. Then he launched into tales of train journeys through Austria and Switzerland, oversized Bavarian cream puffs that he had seen small children comically trying to stuff into their small mouths at a train station cafe, and the time that he confused the German words for entrance and exit at a museum, and many other similar tales, with Vivian interjecting here and there with a question, word, or remark. At some point, Vivian's mother got up and made them all coffee, and then they moved to the sofa, where Vivian pulled out her sewing, as in days of old. Vivian felt her mother watching them, so she looked up at Gregory and tried to indicate to him with her gaze that he should stay in the dining chair and not come to sit beside her on the sofa. Gregory seemed to understand and remained in his chair, handing her scissors and a spool of thread from his seat. But then at one point he stood up and walked over to get Vivian a packet of buttons over by the sewing machine. Vivian thanked him. "How did you know Vivian needed these buttons?" her mother asked them. Gregory's smile wavered. "I heard her say she needed them. Mademoiselle Vivian, did you not tell me to bring you the buttons from the sewing machine?" Vivian looked up at him. She had said nothing of the kind. He had simply known, and it had struck her as so natural that he had known that she did not even think to question it as unusual. Yes, I believe I did," she quickly lied. In any case, thank you, Mr. Morgan. Do you have many book deliveries to make today?" "I have a few," he said. "Business is picking back up, and soon we will be very busy with holiday orders. Someone always comes in asking to have old family heirlooms repaired." He smiled at Vivian, then added, "My regards to Mademoiselle Denard. Please tell her I am thinking of her especially, and wish her all the best." And then he collected his hat, said his farewells, and went out. "That Mr. Morgan is better at flattery than he lets on," said her mother, once Gregory had gone. She came and sat down next to Vivian on the sofa. "I'm trying to recall his line of reasoning for first wanting to marry you, but now being glad that you have a new beau, but I cannot readily call it to mind. He suggested some nature of incompatibility, but what could it be when you two are so connected? I know you did not ask him for the buttons, and I see him hand you scissors before you request them, and you fill in words for him where he has forgotten what he would say, although he is telling stories you have not yet heard. It is not possible that he would not love you, or that you would not love him, and yet that things would be like this between you two. I will speak frankly. I'm worried about you, Vivian, and about the choices you have made in regards to your beaux." Vivian put down her sewing. It would do no good to keep silent any more on the truth, and she suddenly felt that it was going to do both her and Gregory a better service for her mother to know how things stood, rather than for Vivian to continue to keep Gregory's awkward secret for him. "Mother, he loves me, and I love him as well, but he would not make a suitable husband. You know he is not like other men, and he has never really explained himself to me, but he has now told me that he is incapable of having children." Vivian could feel her mother's spine straighten in surprise. "You mean he is, as a man is he impotent?" she finally asked. Then she blushed. "Oh, child, do you even know what that word means?" "Yes, Mother, I do. He has never used that word, and I would never ask him directly, but that is one of my worries. He has also never really kissed me, or even tried to kiss me. It was an unusual courtship. Chip Westcott takes me out, laughs with my friends, and has given me, well, certain indications of his interest in me as a woman, but Mr. Morgan never has." "Oh dear, what indications exactly has Mr. Westcott given you?" asked her mother, dabbing at her forehead with her handkerchief. "No, I'm not certain I want to know. He has not behaved inappropriately with you, though, has he?" "No, he has not, but he has kissed me, and I could feel in his kiss that he, thinks about behaving inappropriately, although of course he has not done so, if you understand what I mean," said Vivian carefully, wondering if she had waded into this conversation far too deep, but now it was too late to backpedal. "Oh, yes, I can understand what you mean," grumbled her mother as she stood up. "Oh, Vivian, is this the truth about your two beaux, then?" "Yes. It has been a strange courtship with Mr. Morgan, and it seems even more so to me now that I have something else to compare it to," said Vivian. Her mother moved to the table to clear the items from their coffee. "But if things were different, and Mr. Morgan could love you, like a virile and healthy man, and could give you children, then I would have chosen him," said Vivian shortly, concluding her mother's sentence. It was all really very uncomplicated when one laid it out so directly. If Gregory had truly wanted her as a hale and healthy man would, then there would have been no further questions for her. Her mother set the coffee cups back down again. "If this is true, then what you are saying is very tragic for you both, and moreover, what you are planning to do next is very dangerous." "What do you mean?" asked Vivian, feeling a lecture or a piece of unwanted parental advice coming. "I mean that you both love each other, but there is, as you believe, an unsurmountable obstacle between you. Under these circumstances, is it prudent to continue to see him and to remain in any kind of contact with him? What would further contact yield you both, except hurt feelings and disappointment? And how is Mr. Westcott to feel, knowing that he is not only the second-rate choice for you, but also that you continue to remain entangled with another man whom your heart loves more? You must end this friendship, Vivian. It cannot be like this." Vivian squirmed. "Chip is not my second-rate choice. I love him," she said defensively. "I have seen you with him when he comes calling," said her mother. "You smile happily, but you do not drop into a private universe of just the two of you, as you do when Mr. Morgan visits. Mr. Westcott is a nice young man, and he deserves better than someone who isn't sure where to give her heart." "But I am sure where to give my heart," countered Vivian. "I choose to give it to Chip Westcott." "You can say this to me now, but when you are not looking, your heart is giving itself visibly and without thought to Gregory Morgan." Oh, I should not have agreed to his renewed visits. Next time he comes, I will speak to him about this," said her mother. But she did not speak to him about it the next time, or the next time after that. And Vivian's confession solidified the return to friendship that Gregory Morgan had bought with his skilled persuasion of her mother. Nadine had given her a strange look when Vivian passed along Gregory's greeting, and then, having already admitted the true state of things to her own mother, Vivian confided in Nadine as well. This was the first return to any kind of deeper trust between the friends since their difficult summer. Nadine's decision to spend a few recent evenings alone with Vivian had brought them into closer contact again and had renewed their friendship. Still, it was harder to justify talking about Gregory's highly private shortcomings as a man to Nadine than it had been to justify speaking of them with her mother. But Nadine stubbornly kept suggesting that Vivian was making a big mistake with Chip when Gregory was the one she loved, and Vivian could not take any more of Nadine's constant holding up of Gregory's end of everything. After she had sworn her to extreme secrecy and telling no one, not even Frank, Vivian explained, as best as she could, how things stood. Nadine's mouth hung open in surprise. "Oh, Vivi, what do you suppose happened to him? He said that he was once a healthy man who could have fathered children, but now he cannot? Well, that must be why he has not married, which I've always wondered about. It is ironic, isn't it, that the handsomest man in New Orleans, and the one that every woman would want to take to her bedroom, would maybe not be able to bed any of them." "Ugh, Nadine, how could you say it like that? How crude." Now it was Vivian's turn to be shocked. "Well, maybe, but despite everything he loves you. Think about that," cried Nadine. "Yes, and I love him too. Don't you think I have thought on it 100 times now? What would you have me do?" retorted Vivian. "Even if, with a love so great, maybe you can forego certain things in order to be with him?" asked Nadine. "That's easy for you to say, with a beau who loves you and wants you and kisses you and will marry you and will give you children and will eat meals with you and all the rest of it. I'm probably too practical, but I cannot overlook all of these things as if they were only minor shortcomings," cried Vivian. "Well, at least it is noble of you that you're not swayed by his 800 acres, said Nadine. "He came to propose to me and brought with him a ring with a diamond the size of a large raisin," said Vivian. "Really? Oh, truly, Vivi, you are living a life like in the motion pictures," Nadine exclaimed. "Yes, and the film was a romantic tragedy, or a comedy. It could still go either way," sulked Vivian. "But with things as they are between you and Gregory, could you really marry Chip? I know he has asked you and you've said yes to him, but your mother does not yet know, so that makes it secret and unofficial, and you could still change your mind. Could you really marry Chip?" asked Nadine. "Why not? He is handsome and funny, and he loves me, and he will always treat me wonderfully well, and he has no secrets, and he has a job, and can take care of a family, and we will have a crowd of beautiful, blonde-haired and blue-eyed little boys, and it will be a full and happy life," said Vivian. "Are you really so practical, Vivi, that you could go into this life and not miss anything from what you would have had with Gregory?" asked Nadine skeptically. "Nadine, I am not the dreamer and reader of unreasonably passionate ladies' novels that you are," said Vivian. "You are my very good friend, but you are also very different. My choices might not suit you, and yours might not suit me. Gregory seems almost eager to suffer over love. Me, I just want to be happy in this life, and Chip makes me happy." "So will you send Gregory away?" asked Nadine. "No. We have clarified to each other the new boundaries of our friendship, and I see no reason why he should not stay and pay us the occasional family visit," said Vivian. "Now who is the unreasonable dreamer?" replied Nadine. Has anyone ever had a friendship such as you propose? Have you ever heard of such a thing? No, because no such thing has ever existed. Now I understand how you are able to make this seemingly all-practical decision. You think you can say yes to Chip without having to say no to Gregory, but you cannot have them both like this. You think everything is now clarified, but has Chip met Gregory already? And does Chip agree with your views? No, they have not met yet. But Chip has no problems with Gregory. Chip is very comfortable and confident in our relationship, said Vivian. In which one? Yours and his, or yours and Gregory's? Asked Nadine. Oh, for heaven's sakes, in mine and his, retorted Vivian, giving into frustration and regretting her choice to confide in her friend, their fresh-laid layer of trust already starting to melt a bit in Vivian's eyes. Chip is not worried about Gregory in the slightest. He will be when he meets him, intoned Nadine morosely. You know as well as I do that when Gregory walks into a room, both men's and women's mouths hang open. To believe that one's fiancé is strictly on a friendship basis with such a man would strain most men's credulity. Well, then I had best take care that Chip and Gregory never meet, replied Vivian haughtily. But it was only a few days later, in the week of Halloween, that Chip and Gregory did meet. Vivian had a curfew with her mother to be home by 9, but there had been occasions on which she had not returned until 10, and on 1 or 2 recent occasions she had not come home until almost 11. Most of Chip and Vivian's rendezvous began as an outing with a larger group, but then once the others had dispersed to go home, their solitary rendezvous would begin, and Chip did not always want to let Vivian go when it was time to end the evening, and Vivian did not want him to stop kissing her. Much of the time they were already at Vivian's apartment building, but then sat downstairs on the steps rather than going up, talking and holding hands. Chip was a humorous and talkative young man, but he was also ambitious, and Vivian quickly learned that he viewed his current life circumstances as just a temporary stop on the way to a large home and a job with a private secretary. To his credit, Chip never thought of how few people he knew in America, or how little formal schooling he had, or that these things might keep him down or hold him back. He only ever saw before him the ladder leading up. To Vivian, he was always a most attentive beau, and when she looked in his eyes, she did not need to wonder if he thought she was beautiful. Time passed so pleasantly that it was often later in the evening than she realized by the time she reached her own front door. But to her mother, this was an act of rebellion, and then Vivian refused to apologize, so it did become an act of rebellion. On Halloween Eve, Vivian, Nadine, their beaux, and their friends were walking through the French Quarter, where a large number of drunken revelers filled the streets. It did not require a holiday to bring drunken revelers out to the French Quarter, but when there was something to drink to, there was always a loud crowd, and often also many out-of-town visitors. It was now approaching 9 o'clock, but Vivian had gotten permission from her mother to stay out until 10, because it was Halloween. None of Vivian's friends wore costumes. That would have been a childish thing to do. But they were in boisterous spirits, although none of them had been drinking anything they shouldn't have been. They were ambling aimlessly through the streets, and Mabel was telling them anecdotes of haunted happenings that had occurred at the Lemieux residence, where Mabel still worked. "Those aren't haunted happenings," Alice was saying. "Those are you and the other help playing pranks on that poor old woman because you know her mind is going." They were all passing the Lafitte blacksmith shop bar when Vivian noticed a barely visible shadow of a man, dressed all in black, leaning against the side of the building in the shadows. He had almost imperceptibly moved his leg, and something about the way he looked, his slimness and his height, made Vivian look twice. She came to a standstill on the sidewalk. "Gregory?" she called out before she could stop herself. His dark suit peeled itself out of the shadow he had been standing in, and he stepped toward the sidewalk. His hands were in his pockets, and he was wearing a black hat, black shirt, and a black tie. So the only contrast with his suit now was his pale, extremely handsome face. Vivian's party of friends came to a stop also, and walked back to where Vivian was standing. Gregory looked at Vivian and then at her friends. It seemed that he would frown, but then his expression gave way to a polite smile. "Good evening, mademoiselle," he said. "What a disappointment. I thought my choice of clothing would help to make me invisible, and yet you noticed me. Well, on the plus side, I've been standing here some time, and you are the first one who saw me thus far. Are these your friends?"
"Miss Vivian, do you know this man?" Chip asked her, puzzled. And for the first time since she had noticed Gregory, she remembered that Chip was there, standing right next to her. Yes, I do. This is our friend, Mr. Gregory Morgan. He is a friend of mine and of my mother's. Mr. Morgan, allow me to introduce Mr. Westcott. And this is Mabel, and Helen, and Mary, and Louis, and William, and Hardin, and Alice, and Frank. Nadine Denard, you already know," said Vivian awkwardly. Gregory politely shook hands with everyone. When his attention returned to Vivian, she added pointedly, "Mr. Chester Westcott is in the liquor business and works at Silver Streak Bar." Gregory's mouth opened, then closed, and then it looked like he had just thought of something, but he did not give any indication of what it might be. Then a polite smile came onto his face, and he looked again at Chip. "Sir, it is indeed a pleasure to meet you. Mademoiselle Vivian has spoken highly of you on several occasions, and I know you two are especial friends. I am honored." Vivian thought for a horrified moment that he would execute one of his small, formal bows, but Gregory did nothing of the sort. He just smiled at Chip and waited for some kind of reply. Chip coughed politely into his closed fist. "I always enjoy meeting Miss Vivian's friends as well. Where do you know the Prevets from again?" Gregory's otherworldly smile, already a scary thing to Vivian, grew wider. "It is a longer story than we have time for, I think. Where are you all headed? Perhaps I can walk part of the way with you." "Yes, come join us, Mr. Morgan," said Nadine. "We have decided to walk out to the St. Louis Cemetery, just because it is Halloween."
"Ah, the St. Louis Cemetery," said Gregory with a light tone, but his eyes looked anything but casual and friendly. "I like when stories have nice and symmetrical structure, and here we come full circle. The St. Louis Cemetery is by the Basin Street station, and I vividly remember our meeting there once, mademoiselle." Chip looked at Vivian. "Is it a memorable story? I do love a funny anecdote." Vivian felt a faintness come over her. This conversation had to move swiftly to a conclusion. She asked Chip to look at his watch and to give her the time. "It was only modestly entertaining, I think. We need to get on our way, or else we will have to turn around and go home before we ever reach the cemetery." "Mr. Morgan, do come with us, at least for a bit of the way," said a voice. It was Mabel. Vivian turned to see Mabel's eyes the size of dinner plates, looking up at Gregory and smiling dreamily in his direction. Vivian thought she would be sick. Well, At least Gregory wouldn't accept. "I'd be glad to join you for a bit," Gregory replied as Vivian's stomach sank like a rock. "Thank you for the invitation." "Yes, join us for a bit," echoed Vivian hollowly. She felt Chip offer her his arm, and she gladly took it so as to better steady herself. Inside her heart, a black anger unleashed at Gregory, at herself, and at the whole world. Why had he had to mention the day of the accident by the Basin Street station, and then follow it up by tagging along with them on this walk? When he next visited them, she would have to speak to him about it sharply. "Yes, Mr. Morgan, come and tell us about yourself," said Maybelle, positioning herself closer to Gregory so that she could be the most immediate recipient of any information that he was willing to share about himself. Mary moved in closer as well, so that Mabel had to jockey for position to remain nearest to him. Vivian would have laughed, only it was too irritating by half, and she wanted to bang their two brainless heads together instead. Suddenly, the annoyance of a lifetime spent batting other women away from Gregory dawned on Vivian. She remembered him leaning against the pillar at the train station in Shriever, and how no one within sight distance would ever have noticed her while he stood there like that. A lifetime of this would get wearisome quickly. "And tell you something about himself. Ha! He won't tell you anything," thought Vivian cynically. "It would be easier trying to squeeze blood from a stone." "That sounds delightful," said Gregory politely. "But first do tell me a bit about all of you." The group walked on, with everyone giving some additional background about him or herself, and Gregory deftly kept the conversation flowing away from him, asking people additional questions and skillfully redirecting any questions directed at himself. Chip was saying something to Vivian, but she was straining to hear the conversation happening between Gregory and the group, so she didn't hear a word of what Chip was telling her. Why had Gregory agreed to walk with them to the cemetery? She should have put her foot down and indicated to him that she did not think it was a good idea that he hang about. Was he doing it on purpose, to make himself annoying? They reached the cemetery, which, of course, was closed, and they stood by the gate and looked in. "Oh, good. For a moment I had a fear that we would have to go in," said Gregory. "I'm very glad the cemetery is closed. What a relief it is. What will you do now? Will you be staying out much longer?" "Oh, are you afraid of cemeteries, Mr. Morgan?" asked Mabel with a stupid giggle. Did she have any idea how unbelievably annoying and daft she sounded? Wondered Vivian. "Not particularly, and you could say that Halloween is my natural holiday. But there are more pleasant ways to spend the time, aren't there?" "In a bar, perhaps," said Gregory. "Oh, now you're talking sense," agreed Chip. Vivian looked at Gregory. Please go, she thought. Please, just go. This cannot go on. "What time is it now?" she asked again. "I think I should go home now." Gregory took a deep breath, made a show of slowly and dramatically pulling out his pocket watch. "Ah, well, speaking of more pleasant ways to spend the time, I also have somewhere to be shortly. I am glad that I could walk with you for a bit, and it was such a delight to meet you all." The group said goodbye to Gregory, and Vivian did as well. For a moment their gazes crossed, and she could feel him, as if he was the one holding her arm, and not Chip, and then he turned around and was walking back up Basin Street. She watched his retreating back until she became aware of Chip watching her, and then she turned to him with a smile. "It has been a nice Halloween Eve, I think, but I do need to get home soon or my mother will be angry with me." Chip smiled back at her. "Certainly, Vivian. Frank, you will have to scale the walls into the cemetery yourself, I fear, because I need to escort Miss Vivian home." They said their goodbyes to their friends, and then Chip walked Vivian to the streetcar stop to wait for the streetcar with her. "What an interesting fellow, this Mr. Morgan. Why do you suppose he walked out with us to the cemetery like that?" "Who knows? He is very unpredictable," said Vivian. He is a family friend. He comes to call occasionally because my mother thinks he is interesting, but I do not understand him very well." The lie came out with only a slight degree of discomfort. "I'm very tired suddenly. Let's get back." Chip pulled her close and boldly kissed her cheek, although they were under the circle of lamplight and others were standing nearby, also waiting for the streetcar. "I hope you had a wonderful Halloween," he said to her with a charming smile.
You and the night and the music fill me with flaming desire, setting my being completely on fire. You and the night and the music thrill me, but will we be one after the night and the music are done? Until the pale light of dawning and daylight, our hearts will be throbbing guitars. Morning may come without warning and take away the stars. If we must live for the moment, love till the moment is through. After the night and the music die, will I